You reach for the salt before you have tasted your food. That ordinary white stuff your doctor keeps telling you to eat less of was once so precious. Armies were paid in it, and wars were fought over it. Now it sits in the shaker on your table, and when it got there, is one of the most revealing questions about who we are. So, when did humans really start eating salt? Not in a single moment, but across hundreds of thousands of years, in a hunger older than farming that guides your hand tonight. Before you can know when your ancestors first started eating salt, you have to understand why your body simply cannot do without it. Sodium, the part of salt that actually matters, is not optional. It is the thing that keeps water balanced inside every cell, carries the electrical signals that fire through your nerves, tells your muscles when to contract, and holds your blood pressure steady. Your body works hard to keep the sodium in your blood inside an incredibly narrow window. Drift too low, and you get confusion, seizures, even death. Drift too high, and the damage comes just as fast. And here is the part most people miss. Keeping that balance takes an enormous amount of machinery. Your kidneys monitor sodium around the clock, deciding, with every drop of blood, whether to flush it or hold it back. A whole chain of hormones exists, mostly to hold on to it. Your brain even has cells, whose only job is to sense your sodium level and set off a craving when you run low. Evolution does not build systems this elaborate to manage something that is easy to find. The very fact that your body guards salt so carefully is a clue, a fossil hidden in your own biology, that getting enough of it was once a real struggle. Think of it like a savings account, built for hard times. Your body hoards sodium, the way your ancestors had to, storing every gram against the next shortage, even though your kitchen will never run out. So every heartbeat in your chest, every blink of your eyes, every thought crossing your mind right now is running on salt. You are not just seasoning your food when you reach for that shaker. You are answering a demand your body has been making for longer than you have been alive, older than agriculture, older than memory itself. But that ancient demand was tuned for scarcity, not abundance. And here is the strange part. This craving is not really about food. It is a survival instinct, older than history. If mysteries like that hook you, stick around. Because next, we go back to where it all began. So if sodium is that essential, here is the puzzle. Long before anyone poured salt into a jar or set a shaker on a table, where did your ancestors actually get it? For most of the story, they did not have to think about it at all. The great apes we descend from lived on leaves, fruit, and stems, and plants like these carry enough sodium to cover the needs of an animal that mostly sits, chews, and stays in the shade. Their food did the work for them. No cravings, no searching, no salt required. Then everything changed. As early humans moved onto the hot, open grasslands, they walked farther, hunted harder, and sweated through the day, under a punishing sun. And every drop of that sweat carried sodium out of the body. Suddenly, the easy balance was gone, and a gap opened up between what the body lost and what plants could put back. For the first time, the body could run short of the very thing it could not live without. Nature offered a fix, though not an obvious one. Fresh meat holds sodium, so does fresh blood, which is surprisingly rich in it. As our ancestors ate more animals, they were, without knowing it, drinking back some of the salt they sweated away. But meat alone did not always close the gap, and that is where a second clue shows up, written into the behavior of almost every animal on the plains. Animals go looking for salt. Deer, cattle, elephants, they all travel to the same mineral licks, natural patches of salty earth, and wear paths into the ground, returning to them. If you have ever hunted in the American backcountry, a salt lick is still the surest place to wait for a deer. The pattern is that reliable and always has been. Early humans watched the same thing, and they were the sharpest animal watchers who ever lived. They noticed which springs drew the herds, tasted the strange water, and followed the animals. straight to the source. That is the quiet inheritance you carry. When a deer licks a block of salt in the woods, and when you reach for the shaker, you are both answering the exact same ancient pull. Your ancestors learned to track it across a whole landscape. You only have to reach a few inches. But following the herds only worked if there was salt at the end of the trail, and that is where the planet played favorites. Salt was never spread out evenly. Some places practically offered it up, and others hid it away completely. Where the land was dry, water did the work. Shallow lakes baked under the sun, until they vanished, leaving flat white crusts behind, salt you could see and scrape right off the ground. Elsewhere, water ran deep through salty rock and bubbled up as briny springs that tasted sharp and strange. And along every coastline, the sea handed out sodium for free in the spray, the tide pools, and almost everything living in the water. None of it needed digging or invention, only the luck of living nearby. Here is the part that should give you chills. One of the richest regions for these exposed deposits is the Afar of East Africa, the same ground that has given up more early human fossils than almost anywhere on Earth. The cradle of our species sat right on top of an open salt supply. That is probably not a coincidence. The result was a hidden map drawn across the ancient world. Groups living near the coast or on top of natural deposits were almost never short of sodium. Groups deep inland, cut off from the sea and the licks, lived closer to the edge, one bad season away from real trouble. Same species, same needs, but two very different odds of making it. So, the story of salt was never only about the body. It was about the ground, under your ancestors' feet, where they happened to stand, decided how easily they survived, and that same buried logic still runs beneath your life today, because the map of salt was always, quietly, the map of survival. But that map left a hard question hanging. What about the people who lived far from any coast, any lick, any salty spring, deep in a rainforest, where the ground gave up nothing? By the map, they should have been in constant trouble. Instead, they did something remarkable. They made their own. All around the world, in places that never touched, humans landed on the same strange trick. Groups in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, the Amazon, and Central Africa gathered certain plants, dried them, and burned them down to ash. Then they ate that ash, or soaked it in water, and cooked with the salty liquid that came out. It sounds almost desperate until you look at the chemistry. Some plants pull sodium out of the soil and store it in their leaves and stems. Burn those plants, and the sodium stays behind, concentrated in the ash. It is basic chemistry, but nobody taught it to them. They worked it out through trial and taste. So when they seasoned their food with it, they were, in a very real sense, salting it. The source was fire and greenery, instead of a dried lake bed, but the mineral hitting the tongue was the same. Sit with what that means. No coastline, no trade, no idea what sodium even was, and still, driven by nothing but a craving they could not name, people invented a way to manufacture salt out of plants and flame. That is not a quirk. That is how deep the need runs. It does not wait for salt to appear. It goes out and makes salt happen. And it is the same need, dialed down to something small and easy, that lifts your own hand toward the shaker. They burned whole forests to answer it. You just twist a cap. Burning plants for ash was clever, but it was still scavenging, still working with whatever the world left lying around. Then, somewhere along the way, humans crossed a line that changed everything. They stopped simply finding salt and started making it on purpose. The oldest hard evidence we have comes from a place called Lunca in what is now Romania. There, more than 8,000 years ago, people carried water from a salty spring, poured it into clay pots, and boiled it over a fire until the liquid vanished and left nothing but pure, solid salt behind. This is not someone stumbling on a salt lick. This is a process, a recipe, a small factory built for one purpose: Picture one of them, crouched by the fire for days, watching the water shrink, guarding a handful of white grains, like treasure. And that detail matters more than it looks. You do not invent a technology to produce something unless you already depend on it. Nobody boils water for days to make a mineral they can take or leave. The very existence of these ancient salt works proves that demand had outgrown. Whatever nature handed out for free, the craving had become a need. The land alone could no longer satisfy. That is the quiet turning point buried in this story. Salt stopped being a lucky find and became a thing. People had to secure, produce, and protect. It went from nice to have to cannot live without. And that shift, made by strangers boiling pots by a river, thousands of years ago, is the same shift you live inside. Every time you assume the shaker will be there, so people could now make salt on demand. You would think that solved the problem for good. Instead, humanity's single greatest invention was about to make the salt problem far worse, almost overnight. That invention was farming. When our ancestors stopped chasing herds and settled down to grow crops, they leaned their whole diet on a few grains: wheat in the Middle East, rice in Asia, corn in the Americas. It fed more people than hunting ever could. But those grains share one quiet flaw. They are almost completely stripped of sodium. Think about the trade that just happened. For millions of years, the diet had been rich in meat and blood and wild plants, foods that carried salt built right in. Now, in the blink of an eye, the main course was a bowl of grain that offered almost none. The body's need had not dropped by a single milligram. The supply just fell off a cliff. Every day, farming families came up short by a few precious grams of sodium, the exact thing their nerves and hearts could not run without. And here is where two forces slam together. At the very moment farming created this gap, those same settled people were crowding into the world's first cities. Suddenly you had thousands of mouths in one place, all needing food that would not rot before winter. And what stops meat and fish and vegetables from spoiling? Salt. Almost by accident, the same mineral their bodies were starving for turned out to be the one thing keeping a city fed through the lean months. So salt quietly became two things at once: a nutrient people could no longer get from their food, and the technology that made permanent settlement possible. Demand did not just grow, it exploded. You can feel the echo of that gap on your own plate. The reason bread, chips, and almost every packaged thing in your kitchen tastes of salt is not random. It traces straight back to the day we swapped a wild, salty diet for a farmed, empty one and started pouring the difference back in by hand. The pressure was building. And where there is pressure and a thing everyone needs, someone always steps in to control it. Once a whole society cannot function without salt, a simple and ruthless logic takes over. Whoever controls the salt controls the people. And all across the ancient world, powerful rulers figured that out fast. Look at Rome. As the story goes, Roman soldiers were sometimes paid, in part, with an allowance for salt, a payment they called the salarium. That single Latin word is the reason you earn a salary today, and it is why we still say, a good worker is worth their salt. Rome even ran a dedicated road just to move the stuff, the Via Salaria, the Salt Road, carved across Italy for one mineral. And this was not a Roman quirk. On the far side of the world, camel caravans hauled slabs of salt across the Sahara and traded them, ounce for ounce, for gold, because to an inland city, salt was worth exactly that much. Imperial China built one of the oldest government monopolies in history on salt, funding whole dynasties from it. The Maya, the kingdoms of Africa, the empires of the East, none of them had ever spoken to each other. Yet everyone arrived at the same idea: control the salt, and you control everything downstream of it. It even shaped this country. In upstate New York, Syracuse grew so rich, boiling salt from its brine springs, that people called it Salt City, and that salt, shipped along the Erie Canal, helped bankroll the early United States. During the Civil War, salt became a weapon. Union forces deliberately targeted Southern salt works because without salt to preserve meat, an army could not be fed. Cut the salt, and you starve an army without firing a shot. For a nation, running out of salt was not an inconvenience. It was a slow, grinding defeat. Step back, and the pattern is almost eerie. Cultures separated by whole oceans, who could not possibly have copied one another, all decided the same thing, that salt was too important to leave alone. They organized it, monopolized it, taxed it, and fought over it. Nothing does that, except a true necessity. Not spices, not gold, salt. And that ancient power sits, faintly, in your own life right now. The next time a paycheck lands, and you think of your salary, remember what it actually means. You are being paid in a word that has outlived empires, in salt. The thing in your shaker once literally moved the world, but there is a dark twist, hidden inside all that control. If everyone is forced to buy salt, and nobody can ever quit it, then salt becomes the perfect thing to tax. You do not need to make people want it. They already have to have it, and for centuries. Governments squeezed that need for everything it was worth. France built an entire system around it, a hated salt tax called the gabelle. It did not just charge people for salt, it forced households to buy a fixed amount every year, at a price the crown set, whether they needed it or not. To ordinary families, it felt like being taxed, simply for staying alive. That resentment simmered for generations, and when the French Revolution finally erupted, the gabelle was near the top of the list of grievances people wanted torn down. The same story played out under British rule in India. The colonial government made it illegal for Indians to gather or produce their own salt, forcing a whole population to buy taxed salt from the very sea and soil beneath their feet. In 1930, Mahatma Gandhi answered that with something breathtakingly simple. He walked. For 24 days, he marched more than 200 miles to the coast, then bent down and picked up a lump of natural salt from the shore, breaking the law with a single handful. That quiet act of defiance became one of the great turning points in the fight for Indian independence. And this is the part worth sitting with. To tax salt is to tax the one thing a human body physically cannot refuse. It is a tax on survival itself. So the fury it produced was not really about money. It was the rage of people being charged for the right to keep their own hearts beating. The size of the anger matched the size of the need, and the need was total. Now, look back at that little shaker in your kitchen. That plain, cheap, forgettable seasoning was once worth walking 200 miles for. It was worth defying an empire. It was worth a revolution. Something you would not think twice about has, in living memory, brought people into the streets. And it all traces back to that same ancient hunger, the one that is about to explain why your own hand keeps reaching for it. So, after all of that, the deep biology, the salt licks, the burning forests, the boiling pots, the empires and the revolutions, the whole story finally arrives in one small, ordinary place. Your own hand reaching for the shekar, and now you can see that reach for what it really is. Your tongue is not neutral about salt. You have taste receptors dedicated specifically to sodium, and saltiness is one of the basic tastes your brain treats as fundamental right alongside sweet and bitter. When salt hits your tongue, it does not just register as flavor. It lights up the same reward circuits, the same rush of dopamine that once fired when your ancestors found water or ripe fruit. Your brain rewards you for eating salt because, for almost all of human history, finding it was a genuine victory, a small reward for solving a problem that could kill you. But here is the twist that ties the whole story together. That craving was fine-tuned across hundreds of thousands of years. For a world where salt was rare and hard to win, your instincts are still running. That ancient program that screams, get salt whenever you can, because you might not find any tomorrow. The problem is, that program is now running in a world of total abundance, where salt is cheaper than almost anything else and hidden in nearly every packaged food on the shelf. This is what scientists call an evolutionary mismatch, and you are living inside it every single day. The average American now takes in around 3,400 milligrams of sodium a day, well above the roughly 2,300 milligrams that health experts recommend. Your body is still bracing for a shortage that is never coming, and the result shows up as rising blood pressure and strain on hearts that were built for a hungrier world. The very instinct that once saved your ancestors is now quietly working against you. So think one more time about that reflex from the very start, where your hand grabs the salt before you have even tasted the food. That is not impatience. That is not a bad habit. That is an instinct, older than farming, older than language, older than history itself, reaching up through thousands of generations to move your fingers right now. It is not really a craving for flavor at all. It is evolution, still alive inside you, still whispering the oldest command your body knows: find the salt. So, when did humans really start eating salt? Not on any single day, but from the moment our ancestors became human enough to follow the animals to the salt hundreds of thousands of years ago. Every road, every tax, every war, every city they built was just the visible tip of one unchanging need, the same need still resting on your table tonight. The most ordinary thing in your kitchen turns out to have quietly written civilization. And salt is not the only ancient instinct still running your modern life. If you are curious, what other prehistoric habits are hiding in your daily routine? Stick around and keep watching with me. Because the next time your hand drifts toward that shaker, well, maybe it is worth a second thought.